Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Carrie Heller, and welcome to this podcast episode. Today, we're going to talk about pandemic uncertainty. Usually, when I do podcasts, they are well planned out and focused on concrete tools. Today's podcast is going to be different, given the topic. So navigating the COVID-19 pandemic has definitely been quite the experience. I mean, it's been challenging, eye-opening, disturbing, frustrating, anxiety-provoking. I certainly had some positives as well. I mean, obviously everyone's different in terms of their perspective, but, I think, if you poll people, for a lot of people, there's at least some positives come out of it. Probably far more so for some than others. As a psychologist, it's definitely been a strange experience helping children, teens, and adults, manage and process various aspects of their lives that have been impacted by the pandemic, while simultaneously, experiencing many of these same things in my own life. There are many questions that I wonder about, and I imagine many of you may as well. I'm going to share some of them. The idea of trying to help you think about how you can start to make sense of the current state of the pandemic, which is definitely easier said than done, I would certainly imagine. I certainly haven't made sense of it at this point yet either. In terms of questions I might think about, is this the last wave? Are we just waiting for the next one? Is now the time to learn to live with the pandemic and stop waiting for it to be over? How do we navigate things when kids under 5 still cannot be vaccinated? Other things I think about. How do you manage anxiety about mask mandates being repealed in public places across the country and plans to do so even further in many schools in coming weeks and months? Or I guess if you have a different perspective on that, being bothered by there continuing to be mask mandates in a lot of places. Other things I think about for a lot of people, or I certainly hear about as well, is, could COVID-19 be even worse if you get it again? Am I letting my guard down too much? Am I not being careful enough? Do I feel disconnected from family and friends because of the pandemic? How do I reconnect with people as the pandemic gets better? Other questions that I think are important to think about, in terms of this context are, what if I like certain aspects of the pandemic, like working from home or not having to run errands as much, getting more time at home? That's something I think a lot of people may struggle with, in terms of what about navigating the stuff that you may have to give up as the pandemic gets better? And does the positives of the pandemic getting better outweigh that? Or are there even ways to maintain some of those positive things from the pandemic? Other things people often think about are, is life going to go back to what it was like before the pandemic? I mean, this question kind of reminds me of the TV show Manifest. For anyone that hasn't seen it, basically the premise is there's a flight that goes missing for about 5 years and then suddenly returns. And, the people on the plane really don't know what happened and are, haven't aged and are exactly the same way they were before. Yet the world around them has gone on without them. And so I think this brings up, an interesting point with this idea that, how do we go back to the way things were? I mean, can we go back? Are we even the same people that we were 2 years ago? Are our priorities still the same? So there's a lot that's changed. And while obviously we've been technically living sort of in life during this time, in a lot of ways we haven't really been, a lot of people, haven't been public in quite the same way. Or social circles may be very different. But for other people, it may be sort of normalized on and off at times, or it fluctuates. Sometimes when things are better, maybe things are more or less normal. Other times they change. Or maybe for you, a lot of things have been sort of normal, but there's, maybe these blips of things not being as normal. A few final questions to maybe think about are, have there been silver linings in the pandemic? Or what kind of trauma have we endured from it? And how does that impact us either on a daily basis or more long term? Clearly, as we discussed in terms of thinking about all these questions, there are definitely more questions than answers at this point in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, at least that's my perspective on it at this point. So as we wrap up for today, I hope that getting you thinking about these questions and any others that you have are helpful as you process the current state of the pandemic in your own life and how you fit into it now and in the future. I'm hoping that thinking more about these things as I discuss in the podcast will also help me as well as I try to make sense of everything alongside you guys. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope you stay safe, healthy, and figure out how to make sense of this in your own life.